So today we are talking about foods and how they behave as medicine. And our objectives are to introduce the topic of epigenetics, because it's a big word, but I get very excited about it when I think about how information is translated from the environment into different reactions in the body. We're going to actually zoom into some of the microscopic systems at work that are involved in this process of epigenetics. And then we'll talk about foods that work through epigenetics to impact MS and your immune system. I have to admit, this was a really hard talk for me to put together because there was a lot of really difficult concepts that are scientific and very detailed. But my challenge to myself was, can I present this in a way that everyone can understand? Because this is what's actually happening in our body, and it's fascinating to think about it. And sometimes when you know the reasons behind your different choices, you're more likely to make those different choices. So that's my hope today. So let's just do a quick background on MS. As with really any condition, it's a mix between genes and environment. And there's two things that happen in MS. We know there's myelin damage because we end up figuring out, our immune systems figure out how to produce antibodies to attack myelin. There's also this separate neurodegeneration that can happen, sort of independent of the myelin damage. We know these things happen. We know a lot of the players that are involved, like cell types and chemical messengers, but we don't really know what triggers these processes at the very beginning, right? We have a lot of ideas like exposure to mercury or EBV infections, stress, many things, but we just don't know exactly. But here's what we do know. We know what is involved, such as the immune system gets dysregulated. And dysregulation, just think of it as the immune system forgets the rules, that it's not supposed to attack its own tissues. It's not supposed to attack food. It's supposed to reserve its defenses for things that are foreign, that are dangerous, that we don't want in the body. So that dysregulation just means immune system gets confused and maybe starts one day producing antibodies that attacks our own tissues. In the case of MS, it's myelin. We know there's inflammation involved, and in fact, there's inflammation in the central nervous system, which is comprised of the brain and the spinal cord. So we know inflammation happens too, and that's a result of an immune system that's kind of gone rogue. We know there's changes in cytokines that are secreted, and just think of cytokines as chemical messengers that the immune system uses to communicate. There are cytokines that turn on inflammation. There are other cytokines that turn off inflammation. And somewhere along the way, we tend to produce the ones that are more inflammatory, that keep and maintain inflammation. Then there's also oxidative stress. This is kind of a complex concept to describe, but I think it's really important and it's fascinating. So inside our bodies, there's a lot of stuff happening. And there's something called oxidative stress that has to do with the stress in the environment. And it's a result of two things. One is these molecules called reactive oxygen species. You don't really have to know what they are, other than the fact that these are dangerous molecules that are highly unstable. They bounce around and they try to damage proteins, DNA. So you've got your reactive oxygen species here that cause damage. To buffer that, you need antioxidants. I know we throw on the word antioxidants all the time, but the reason you need antioxidants is to neutralize these reactive oxygen species. If you don't have enough antioxidants, or you have a lot of reactive oxygen species, the balance is off, and that leads to stress or oxidative stress. And we know that that happens at the cellular level in MS. And finally, there's mitochondrial dysfunction, another really fancy term. All you need to know about it is that every cell in our body has 500, 1,000 or more of these mitochondria organelles. They're these tiny little units that produce energy for us. So people who experience fatigue may be having dysfunction in how these mitochondria work. So, but the mitochondria are really fascinating, and they don't just work in energy production. They also determine cell lifespan. They determine how oxidative stress goes. So all of these concepts are not separate things. They're all connected, right? The immune system going out of balance, inflammatory cytokines, too much oxidative stress, and then your mitochondria kind of falling apart. This is not all of it, but these are some of the main players. What we do know is that MS is not just genetics, but it's a combination of genetics and environment. A lot of studies report that maybe 70% of it is environment, maybe just 30% is genetics, and they work together. They're not separate components, okay? This is where the concept of epigenetics comes in. It's the bridge between genetics and the environment. It's how factors out in the environment determine what genes are turned on and off. Okay, so for example, let's say you were in a car accident and got injured. That's a signal from the external world that enters your body through different chemical reactions, hormones, molecules, molecular structures. And these factors get into our cells and they start interacting with DNA. Okay, and as a result, you start sort of decorating your DNA with different groups, and that tells a particular gene to turn on or off. Okay, so let me zoom back out. Something happened out in the environment, a signal was sent into your cell, different molecules were added to the DNA, and certain genes were turned on and off. Okay, and depending on what that signal was, you're going to turn on different genes. If it was something bad, you're going to maybe turn on the inflammatory genes. If that thing was good, like a good night's sleep, you're going to turn on the good genes. So all of the things that happen out in the environment are just information that gets into the body. And epigenetics has really broad effects on all body systems. So it's going to impact your immune and nervous system. It's going to impact how your mitochondria work. It's going to influence oxidative balance. Remember, I said too many unstable molecules is not good. So when you get exposed to a lot of toxins, like let's say BPA from plastics, that can actually put a stress on the systems in your body, and then you get that oxidative stress. So epigenetics is highly sensitive to the environment. It's constantly looking to see what's happening in the environment so that you can determine what you're going to do next on a genetic, cellular, biochemical level. And these changes that are epigenetic, they're reversible, right? You can turn things on and then you can turn things off. You can eat a hamburger and then you can eat, a plant-based meal, and you're just going to keep turning on different sets of genes. So just to give you a quick idea of what that looks like, here's methylation. This is DNA, and these little black popsicles are chemical groups. They're methyl groups added to DNA to create attention to say, hey, turn on this gene, right? Methylation here may have happened based on something that happened in the environment. Another type of epigenetic change is histone acetylation, which is basically putting these chemical groups onto DNA to unravel DNA so that now it's open and exposed and different machinery can come in and start reading the genes. I mean, it's just really fascinating, right? And all of this happens through chemical structures. Okay, we're going to actually zoom in onto some very microscopic pieces of your body that you've probably never thought about. This is a very complex topic, but I just want you to kind of have this visual of this system existing in your body. PPAR-Gamma is a system of DNA receptors. They bind proteins and they turn genes on and off. And typically what PPAR-Gamma turns on is the good stuff. And I always think of the G in gamma as good. So PPAR-Gamma is a good guy. And when the system is turned on through epigenetics, remember you decorated the DNA and the PPAR-Gamma turned on and it started reading genes that turned on anti-inflammatory genes. We also know that it's neuroprotective. So it's good for the brain. It's good for that neurodegeneration that can happen with a condition like MS. And I put a picture here of greater burdock. You may see this like growing on the edges of sidewalks. It's a root with some green leaves, and it contains arctogenin Apigenin, which has been shown actually to reduce inflammation and demyelination in mice that are used to study MS. And we think it works through PPAR-Gamma. So what do you have to do? If you were to eat greater burdock, you would turn on your PPAR-Gamma system, then you would turn down inflammation and you'd protect the brain, okay? And by the way, EAE mice, this is a mouse model of MS, and this is, what does it stand for? Experimental autoimmune encephalomyelitis. Basically, they take mice, they inject them with myelin basic protein, which is a protein that the mice can start making antibodies to, and then they end up using those antibodies to attack myelin. So effectively, you're giving them MS. And then you put them through experiments to see, you know, what the effect of whatever you're studying is. Okay, so the point of this slide was to get you to think about PPAR-Gamma. That's a good system that works through epigenetics. Here's another system, NF-kappa B. I think of the B as bad. This much like PPAR-Gamma is a nuclear transcription factor. It's involved in reading different genes, and its effect is basically to turn on inflammation. And we know that it plays a role in many things, like in neurodegenerative conditions, autoimmunity, cardiovascular disease, cancer. So you basically want to keep NF-kappa B quiet. Okay. So let's now transition to talking about food and how it works through epigenetics. Food is a signal from the environment that sends information into our cells, into our DNA, and works through this process of epigenetics where you start decorating your DNA and turning on different genes. And we know that nutrition has good effects on nerve health and neurodegeneration. So nutrients generally provide the raw materials needed for these genes to be turned on. They can also work on the actual enzymes involved in turning on these different systems, right? Turning on PPAR-Gamma or NF-kappa B. So food can actually help modulate what pathways are turned on or off, right? What's great about this is that we actually have control over this, right? Like I always like talking about things that we can control because that's powerful, right? That puts choice in our hands. So let's take the group of polyphenols, which are foods, these are molecules found widely in plant-based foods, not just fruits and vegetables, but also beans and seeds and legumes, tea and coffee even have them. Polyphenols are known to turn off NF-kappa B, the bad guy. They inhibit the inflammatory cytokine molecules that go and create inflammation. So that's a good thing. They actually suppress inflammatory genes. And then they increase antioxidants. Remember, I said if you have more antioxidants, you can buffer those dangerous molecules that can go around and damage cells. And of course, they reduce reactive oxygen species. So the effect of consuming polyphenols is that it's anti-inflammatory, it's full of antioxidants, and it protects the brain. Okay, it's all good stuff and it's all food. But let's dig into what some of these foods are, and then I'm going to go into a little more detail and give you some data. So here are just 4 groups of polyphenols. There's many more, but look at this. This is a wide variety of plant-based foods, a lot of green stuff here, lots of berries here, and you know, even beans and seeds. So this will just kind of give you an idea of where these molecules hide in food. So let's talk about a flavanol molecule called Apigenin, and it's found in many things like parsley, chamomile, celery, spinach, artichokes, oregano. If you kind of notice, they're all kind of green things. And we know Apigenin is a polyphenol that it has antioxidant and anti-inflammatory properties. How do we know that it actually helps? Well, there was a study done where they used these mice, the EAE mice, that's the mouse model for experiments. And they looked at mice who ended up having relapsing, remitting MS or progressive MS, and gave them foods that contained apigenin. They saw less immune cells that were sort of wonky entering the brain, right? And we know that that's actually part of what happens with MS. Activated immune cells cross into the brain and start attacking various parts of the brain. So there was less immune cells entering the brain and less demyelination. And they were able to measure less relapse and progression in these mice, okay? We don't have a lot of human studies, actually. As you can see, it would be hard to do a study like this in humans, but we have demonstrated this in mice. So my take-home message is maybe there is something to that celery juice craze after all, because I think there's not a day that I go through when I'm seeing patients where somebody goes, can I continue doing my daily celery juice? And I'm like, yeah, if you like it, do it. But a lot of people seem to love it. But I also don't want you to get into this rut of, nutritionism where we like reduce nutrition down to its most basic parts and just get stuck on, okay, I'm going to do celery juice every day, right? My point is that there's a lot of foods out there that are great, but we know that, for example, people do celery juice and they feel great. Okay, maybe it has to do with the apigenin content. Anthocyanins are another type of polyphenol, and they're found in these deeply pigmented berries that are black and red and blue. So when you're looking at food, you're looking at colors because that's where all the healing molecules are. So anthocyanins are also anti-inflammatory. They are potent antioxidants, and they do a lot to restore balance in cells working on ion pumps. You don't have to know too much about that. And when they've given anthocyanin molecules to rats who had, they use ethidium bromide to induce MS in rats. Again, they saw less entry of immune cells into the brain, less inflammatory molecules, and they looked at some of the good cytokines like IL-10, which is an anti-inflammatory molecule, and those levels rose. So the take-home point here is go for deep colors because they work through epigenetics and they can influence what happens in the central nervous system, the brain and the spinal cord. So going for color is really important. Going for color where the color actually goes through the entire fruit or vegetable is even better. Like I think about it as like a beet versus an apple. Apple's kind of brown, tan in the middle. A beet is pigmented all the way through. So go look for these molecules throughout the supermarket and just start stocking up on color. Here's another molecule, EGCG, and I was trying to practice so I could tell you what EGCG stands for, so I could impress you, but I can never remember how to say it. It's like Epigenetic something, yeah, like whatever, it doesn't matter. It's actually highly available in green tea, right? And it's like a really potent antioxidant molecule. You can also get it in black and white tea and lots of berries and fruits and nuts and seeds. Again, this is where it's full of antioxidants. It decreases those reactive oxygen species, those dangerous molecules, and there's evidence that it inhibits NF-kappa B, which was the bad guy. All good things, right? We don't have medications that can really do this. It's only really food that is available to us that can have these broad effects. And they did another interesting study in EAE mice who were given Copaxone, which is a drug used to treat MS, and then they gave EGCG as well. And what they saw was there was, compared to mice that only got Copaxone, there was significant delayed onset of MS. And if the mice went on to get MS, it was less severe. And there was also less disability associated with mice that also got the EGCG, okay? Again, it's not a human study, but I think it illustrates something important. There's something happening here, and there's synergy between a natural product like EGCG and a medication like Copaxone, okay, that's used for MS. So think about synergy. When we use lots of different tools, we actually get a greater effect. So I never get involved in the decision of medications for MS. That's between you and your neurologist. But using medications with a lot of natural therapies like food and good sleep and exercise really gives you a lot of synergy, and that's what we're going for. And if you're only relying on natural therapies and you're not on medications, it's even more important to think about all of the different natural things you could use that are not pharmaceuticals. It just takes a lot more tools when you're working with natural products, because they're not made to be powerful pharmaceuticals. Okay, so where can you find these healing foods? Well, I'm not going to give you a list because I think that would do you a disservice, because then you would focus on that list and you would think that everything else was not important. But I want you to think in broad categories. And this is how I teach nutrition to my patients. I don't, micromanage and say, okay, these are the foods you must eat. I want you to eat mostly plants, because you will flood your body with these polyphenols that are antioxidants. And, we're only talking about polyphenols today. That's just one group of healing molecules. There's so many more out there. So eating plants gives you lots of vitamins, minerals, and phytonutrients. And when you look at this, the red tomato and the, watermelon squash, I forget what it's called, but look at all those colors, the pink and the green. Those are healing molecules. So eat mostly plants, maybe at least 80%. You don't have to become a vegan, vegetarian, but cutting down on animal products and upping the vegetables helps a lot. Find foods and eat them as they grow in nature, right? Dirt is good for you. I mean, yes, wash those carrots, but don't go crazy about making things sterile, right? So avoiding processed packaged foods is actually a really good place to start. And you're never going to get to 0% processed foods, but the more we can avoid them, the better. So think about what you see at the farmer's market, the natural foods that are laid out straight from the farm, right? So always think about that. Am I buying this food as it grew in nature, or did somebody do something to it? I was at Trader Joe's yesterday and you see all the chopped up vegetables. If you have fatigue and you need to have stuff pre-chopped for you, by all means do it. But if you can chop it yourself, it's probably better, okay? And then go for color. Look at just the range of colors in just these tomatoes, right? So when you're at the store, pick some rainbow chard, and when you're going to buy carrots, buy the package with all the different colors rather than just the orange. Bell peppers that are all the different colors. So really go for color, because those are those healing molecules just screaming at you, because that's where a lot of these polyphenols, for example, live. And finally, go for variety. Don't get in the rut of eating the same 15, 20, 30 foods. Being plant-based isn't just about fruits and vegetables. It's about nuts and seeds, beans and legumes, maybe some whole grains, although that doesn't have to be a major component. Here are some underutilized groups: spices, full of antioxidants and anti-inflammatory molecules, and also tea that is, natural. Hopefully you get the loose tea, full of these compounds, okay? So I could give you a list like this and say, go buy everything on this list and eat it. But I think that gets us into this reductionist thinking of this is all there is. So if you go back and think about let me just kind of go through them one more time. You're going to eat mostly plants as they grow in nature, looking for color, and going for variety. I know that sounds really simplistic, but that's really where I think is a good place to start. And then you on your own will think about how to make that work for you. Maybe we all have different cultural influences. We have different taste preferences. Maybe we have food sensitivities. So you're going to pick and choose what works. But if you can stick within those 4 broad recommendations, I think that'll get you far. When you go to the store, try to go to a place that's got food laid out like this and just pick a little bit of everything and challenge yourself to get a lot of variety and a lot of color. Question about what do I think was the top things that helped me the most from an MS perspective? I think you're asking like what helped me get my health on track. I'll tell you what, when I got diagnosed with MS, I had just had my baby. I wasn't sleeping. I had gone back to work and I was working and doing really stressful anesthesia in a really, busy practice. So I think cutting out sugar was key. I was stressed. I was just eating sugar all the time. So cutting out sugar. And then once I was able to actually get a good night's sleep, that was number 2. And then this is a hard one. I had to restructure my life. It was very hard to break up with anesthesia. And I had a lot of fear and doubt because I didn't want to tell my colleagues what was happening. I was hoping my arm would get better and I could come back and work again. I didn't feel really comfortable sharing it at first, but I had to completely revamp my life. I had to give up anesthesia. I had to retrain in other things. So I had to figure out how to live more intentionally and how to reduce stress and how to actually provide space for healing. That was actually the hardest part, which I think a lot of us face with MS. It's a big change.
Yeah. So are there foods to avoid that may be harmful for MS?
Yes, good question. So generally, foods that are natural for us, if we're eating them in normal quantities, they're fine. I would say if there are food sensitivities, right? Because it's pretty common to develop a food sensitivity if you have an autoimmune condition. It's actually kind of a very similar process. Our body's not supposed to make antibodies to our own tissues, but certainly many of us learn to do that to attack myelin. We also learn to attack food molecules accidentally. So cutting out food sensitivities is really important. It's part of a bigger discussion on elimination of foods and reintroduction. It's kind of a protocol you would do. Many of these reactions are subtle. It's very hard to identify them. So I would say, if you wanted just a place to start, cut out gluten and dairy for 6 weeks, see how you feel, and then heavily reintroduce them one by one to see how you feel. Do you feel bad when you eat a lot of gluten for 3 days? Okay. And then the other thing I would say is foods that are bad for us, I would say sugar, if you want to consider that a food, and processed packaged foods. I don't consider those food. If it has a nutrition label on it, it's not, it didn't come from a farm. It's not something you could easily buy at a farmer's market, right? So you're never going to get that down to 0, but the less you could do, and when you choose processed packaged foods, it should have just a few ingredients on the label, hopefully no more than 5. You should be able to pronounce them. When you see things like natural flavors, natural colors, it's so misleading because you're like, oh, it's natural. Like, did they squeeze a strawberry into my yogurt? How nice of them. That's not what they're doing. They're using a chemical compound that smells like strawberries or tastes like strawberries. So anyways, stay away from natural flavors and colors.
Okay, thank you. And Adrian is asking, is it better to eat vegetables raw or cooked?
I mean, I think however you like to eat them is the best way to eat them, right? As long as you're eating them. When we do expose many foods to temperatures, we heat them up, it can deplete some of the nutrients. But I don't want you to get hung up on, oh, I just cooked this thing for 5 minutes and I destroyed it. You didn't. Foods like broccoli, actually, when you steam them lightly and they go from like their regular color to this like beautiful emerald green, that actually can activate a lot of healing components of that food. So I would say don't cook your foods too much where they become mush, but lightly cooking, lightly steaming, having them raw is great. What else? Oh, always cooking in the presence of water is a good thing. When you put things at high temperature for long periods of time without water, you tend to break it down a little bit more. But I'm just happy if you eat vegetables and fruits and colors.
Mm-hmm. What do you think about supplements that contain these nutrients that are bad, that are considered bad for you, like sugar and?
Sure. Well, anything that has a label is not going to be where I would start. We always have a food first approach because it's long-term. It's going to be more sustainable. It's going to give you all of these added nutrients that are found in that one fruit. When you eat an orange, you're not getting just vitamin C. You're getting hundreds of compounds that work together that probably help that vitamin C get absorbed better. So again, it's reductionistic thinking where we think, let me just squeeze this food down into a powder and put it, into a capsule. We know that supplements don't get absorbed as well as food. So because our bodies weren't made to do that, our GI tracts are made to bind and pull in food molecules. So use your GI tract, put food in it. The goal is to get a lot of color in your diet every day, hopefully every color of the rainbow every day. But if there's an issue, like you actually have so many food sensitivities that you have a really limited, narrow diet, I think that's a good case for doing a supplement that has a lot of these foods in the powdered form, just because it'll be easier to just get it in you. Okay. But food first, always, always.
Mm-hmm. Yeah. Julie is asking about materials to avoid cooking in. Do you want to talk about that?
That's a good one. I'm generally all about stainless steel and cast iron. I know that they're sticky, right? Your food can stick to them. There are ways, if you're patient, to sit there and make sure food doesn't stick. There's lots of YouTube videos online that you could look at to how to prepare your pans so your eggs don't stick. But I actually don't care if my eggs stick. I'm just happy there's no Teflon in my eggs. People talk about ceramics. I actually think there's not enough data to recommend them as safe cookware. Do you agree or disagree, Roberta?
Yeah, I agree. Yeah. And they don't last very long. They become sticky anyways, right? The eggs would stick like at some point too. So yeah.
Yeah, and when that coating is like starting to chip off, not only are you getting it in your food, but when you heat up Teflon or other nonstick cookware, you're actually volatilizing materials like PFOAs. These are toxins that are found in a lot of these nonstick materials, and you're breathing them and getting them in your body anyways. So stick to stainless steel and cast iron. They're heavy. I hate I'm small. I have a hard time lifting my heavy pots and pans. And every time my mom comes, she's like, your pots and pans are so heavy. And I'm like, yeah, because they're not Teflon. But anyways, brands, I don't know. I think Cephalon is one it's the only brand I can think of. But also don't go to Costco and buy the 20-piece set. You don't need 20 pieces. You just need a few things that you're going to use. Keep it simple. Invest in good stuff. Take good care of it and don't overbuy.
Yeah. So what about copper?
Ooh, copper. Yeah, it's not my favorite one. You don't want to continually get exposed to copper. You also don't know if it's just fully copper or maybe it wasn't high quality and there's other metals in there, aluminum, other things. So I would just stainless steel and cast iron are the two things I'd stick to. Yeah. Any other questions? Last chance. We're getting close to the end. We have 5 minutes, actually.
Well, we have one more here from before. How much of each nutrient do you need to make sure you are well covered? Make sure you're eating well, you're well nurtured.
Oh, that's a hard one to answer. I don't know. Would you look at the back of a multivitamin and see what they list as the recommended daily allowance? I don't think that we humans think about food in terms of milligrams and servings. And I'm kind of proud to say I actually don't know what serving sizes are for most foods because I don't think about calories and serving sizes. I think about whether or not this is a plant or not. I think about, did I get all the colors? I try to stick to whole foods, things that are unprocessed. But you don't need giant amounts of nutrients every day. You need a little bit all the time, and your body will figure it out as long as there's variety in your diet. I know some of you may have limited diets because of food sensitivities or a lot of health issues. When people kind of fall under 20 different foods, they're eating less than 20 foods per week, that's concerning. So, you may be at risk of becoming depleted of certain nutrients. So keep variety in your diet. A good rule of thumb is 50 foods per week. So get a piece of paper on your dining table or wherever you eat. And for 7 days, you get to write each food down one time. You get credit for each ingredient one time. I give you credit for salt and pepper too. But the way you can cheat it up is to do spices, herbal teas, and lots of color. So, and then as far as like how much of this stuff do you need, aim for every color of the rainbow every day, 1 to 2 times, small amounts. We're not asking you to eat giant amounts of food, but just a little bit all the time.
Okay. Now we have a bunch of questions here in the Q&A box. Do you want to see and go through them? They were not showing for me. Thank you for letting me know. Yeah.
Okay.
Yeah.
I can do some of these quickly. Silicone, no, I don't like it. I've seen some data that says that it's not good. Monk fruit, is it okay? Yes, but keep it to a minimum to sweeten whatever else you're eating. Frozen fruits and vegetables, yes, especially if you can't get them fresh or they're out of season and you can't get them organic. You can get organic berries, for example, that are frozen. And actually flash frozen fruits and vegetables don't lose a lot of their nutrients. So, and that helps a lot of people because of budget or just access to food. So yes, frozen's okay. Fresh is better, but frozen's okay too. Breakfast ideas. Oh, I have lots of ideas, but that would take time, Laureen. Thanks for asking. I'll refer you to some resources. Let's see. Quinoa. Quinoa, is it a grain? I don't know if quinoa is exactly a grain. I don't know exactly. It does have a good amount of protein in it. It's a good protein source if you're plant-based. So, you know, it's not going to be the main part of your diet, but make sure there's a lot of vegetables and other plant-based foods around your quinoa. Christy says, I don't do any of the shopping and my partner has no idea what he's doing. Any ideas how to teach him without being there?
What about making a list together?
Yeah.
So I was excited about having the husband like going to with the partner going to shopping. So I'm like, okay, let's make a list. I jumped in.
Yeah, you put the effort into making the list and then you give him a gold star when he does a good job of bringing that stuff home.